Welcome to today's episode of Insights with Us. I'm Anastasia, a licensed professional counselor, owner of Happy Mind Wellness Company, a Colorado-based therapy practice, and creator of this podcast. My goal is to use this platform to help others find their voice as we share our journeys, and show support as we learn more about ourselves and life. Growth happens when we get uncomfortable, which happens when we sit with new ideas we haven't sat with before. I hope that we can work on this journey of personal growth and understanding together. As a disclaimer, there may be swearing in this podcast, but sometimes we get caught up in the human experience. It happens. And sometimes we can talk about difficult or activating topics. So maybe put on some headphones if you need to, and remember that support exists for you if you want it. For this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Will O'Connor from Inventive Wellness. He is a life coach in the Oregon area, working remotely with people all over the world with a focus on tending to the grounds of embodied well-being and nourishing connection. He builds sustainable growth through creative mutuality, as he puts it. We talk about emotional growth and connection, co-regulation, and how to break free of intellectualizing to show up as our free, unconditionally loved selves. We have a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings, and I'm really excited to share it all with you and for you to hear his voice because it's a powerful one. You can find him on socials at inventive.wellness, his business at inventivewellness.com, and the YouTube page where he shares his knowledge and voice with the world, also called Inventive Wellness. I am really excited for you to hear this episode today. So let's get started and see if we can build some insight. Welcome, Will, to Insights with Us.
Oh, Insights with Us. That's a great little title.
Took me a minute to come up with it. I had so many different ideas. I'm like, you know what? I want community, and I want all of us to just build insight off of each other and just share in the
Hey,
human experience.
hey, that's what I'm here for.
Yes. So tell me more about this relational work. I met you as you were training to become a therapist, and there has been a shift.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. How early on was that in the journey? Do you remember who the TAs were for your class? If there was one or more than one?
I don't remember.
Yeah, that's the only thing that I'd be able to go off of to know which
I
year it was.
I did it in either late 2015 or 2016 was when I
Okay.
met you.
Okay, yeah. So it would have been 2016. Because I don't think I started teaching it till 2016. Wait, no, 2015. Anyways. Yeah, it was a long time ago, and by the time you saw me, I'd only, seen a handful of clients. And needless to say, a lot has changed since then. Um, so the relational work I do right now, long story short, I got sick with COVID and witnessed my life start to fall apart in front of me as I got
Mhm.
sicker and sicker. I got sick going into the last year of that PhD. Um,
Wow.
and yeah, what I found was, I think, things would have fallen apart either way, but I found I really was missing a level of connectedness that I needed to feel good in my nervous system. And that even with all the healing work I had done and pursued different levels of Buddhist practice and authentic relating practice and building a lot of connections into my life, there was still a level of embodied well-being that wasn't all that well cultivated. And judging by my perceptions of the culture of psychotherapy and the contemporary healing world, this is a thing that's often missing. Um, we have these sort of compartmentalized healing models where people come and see a therapist who's ethically obligated not to be a part of their lives, or they
Mhm.
go on spiritual retreats or have their, practices and things. And those things are incredibly valuable. Um, what I can read in the broader social context and the cultural moment and how big words like community are becoming. People are yearning for that level of integrated community connection So the work I do now, I really frame as like emotional relational ecology and how to
Mhm.
center nourishing ways of being, and really help people to find what I talk about as emergent language.
Mm.
So language is always an emergent practice. Like all of these words have emerged over thousands and thousands of years of human relating, and their meaning is always dynamic.
Mhm.
And our nervous systems are always bouncing off of each other. And so, but our language is so primarily thought-based, we aren't out loud actively tracking what's happening in our nervous systems and what's happening between us. And you can actually harness that in service of basic well-being, of feeling good together, of finding the just right level of intimacy moment to moment. I think there's tremendous possibility in those places, and I use it a lot I've done mostly couples work since I've switched to coaching, but it's really good for collaborators, for friends, for any form of chosen family, business partners and things. And just generally, like, how do I orient people to feeling their own inherent capacities for naturalness, for nourishment, for generativity, um,
Mhm.
like the real somatic embodied signatures of those things. Because often when we talk about things like that, we'll talk about, well, what feels nourishing to me is this. It's sort of an analysis, it's thought based, and there's a difference between remembering and reflecting on something and actually experiencing it. And how do we track those real time things, bring that in? So when we are out in our everyday lives, it's easier to recognize those signatures, flow towards those things, and cultivate the ground around us that we're situated within.
First of all, I'm so excited about everything that you are talking about because I feel like with slightly different language, I pretty much teach and embody the exact same everything that you just said. So I am so grateful right now that I randomly decided to reach out
Me
to
too.
you,
Me too.
and because I already feel so connected to everything that you are saying. Especially this idea of so many people can tap into that thought based reaction. Or even if they say they're feeling something, they're thinking about the feeling, right? Well, I'm feeling it because of all these reasons, completely intellectual. And so I'm curious if you could say more about what it means to communicate not from that place of thought, but from the place of that somatic body awareness, from that emotional relational piece.
Yeah, yeah. There's often these underlying processes in interpersonal connection that we don't even realize are happening. So it's like I'm communicating the feeling, but underneath that communication, I'm looking to either be understood or misunderstood. Like, does my analysis of the why make sense to you and can you empathize with it? And again, that's not necessarily bad, but it's a narrow range of our connective capacity. And it's different when you go from like, I'm explaining the situation of my life to you, or this feeling that was alive yesterday that's still kind of here with me, to like, oh, being in connection with you in this moment, I feel a sense of like openness and warmth, but a little bit of caution because that's just the
Mhm.
real time bare truth of what it's like to be in connection in this moment. And there's a different
Yeah.
invitation in that because it's less about you affirming my experience than it is like tracking what it's like to be in connection. So I orient people just to that very basic bare truth. Not to say that it's the only right way of communicating, but when you start to play with that, it gives you um, more of your range of expression. Um,
And how do you teach that to, let's say, a couple where one maybe is all in their feelings and the other has no idea how to even go there or check
yeah,
in?
so I mean, I start really basic, it's much like good meditation instructions. Like the instructions are simple, the practice is complex, and it's the same with this. And I teach it as relational meditation. I mean, I'm drawing from authentic relating practices like circling and T group. Um, and other things. But I really am just like, okay, we're just gonna practice, and I'll help you along the way if you get stuck and things like that. And so it's I normally just introduce it like we're gonna practice the noticing game, like if I'm doing it with a couple, and it's like one of you starts and says, being in connection with you, I feel blank, and just name feeling, sensation, or process. Process being, I talk a lot about getting out of processing and into process because we can spend so much time
Mm.
spinning our wheels and throwing intellectualization back and forth, but missing that we're really just trying to get back to feeling connected and felt and understood. And that's a different layer.
And that's
Yeah,
process.
that's getting the process place is like what's actually happening between us. Because so often in
Yeah.
couples or in any relation, any significant relationship where there's rupture, usually by the time there's a significant enough rupture to seek out help, it's a lot of layers of misattunement and misalignment that have built up over time. And if you actually just build in these little ways of tracking with each other and attuning to each other, you kind of do the everyday emotional relational hygiene that prevents the buildup. And so what I'm getting people to is like, so the noticing game is just one person starts and says, being in connection with you, I feel blank. The other person says, hearing that, I feel blank. And the practice is to
Mm.
leave out story and interpretation as much as possible. It's not super strict. It's just keep people as close to what's alive with that. And I might offer little corrections and things, but for the most part, I'm just guiding people towards finding their own language, what works for their nervous system, because different nervous systems, different neurotypes.
And noticing how theirs shows up and then how that then interacts with their partner's nervous
Yeah, because
system.
it becomes really clear really quick how they're dancing together and how one person might be stepping on the other's toes or might be interpreting one move as meaning something that is more or less than the other person is actually communicating. And how do we get to the barest truth that somebody can communicate in a given moment? Because most of our
Mhm.
communication is really heavily processed. It's like every
Mhm.
layer of analysis on top of real-time experience is a layer of processing. So if I were to say right now, oh, I've got like a sort of a pit in my belly. Like that's, there is some analysis in that, but it's pretty much the bare sensation. I'm not adding analysis about
Mhm.
labeling it beyond the physical sensation. I'm not adding analysis about where it
Mhm.
comes from, the history of it, what it needs to feel better, all of those things.
It just is.
Yeah, and every layer of processing adds potential error in analysis, and it
Mhm.
just, well, it's processed and taking it in terms of like a dietary metaphor, like our relational diets are heavily, heavily, heavily processed where we get just little small nuggets and glimpses of connection. And sometimes we're so
Mhm.
starved for that we get these little bare nuggets of connection. And then we're like, I'm madly in love with this person. And we build whole relationships off of that. And that's, it's not to say that we aren't really aligned with that person, but then when we run into problems down the line, we don't actually know what we're tracking, and what's happening in the connection. And having those skills is indispensable for navigating relationships skillfully.
Well, and I really appreciate that boundary of processing versus process because I'm a couples therapist as well, and trained in EMDR now, which I love because it is so much just bottom up instead of
Yeah.
top down. But there are so many different resources where it's that dance and that back and forth, but they almost teach to think about the story,
Yeah.
right? So it's like notice the reaction, but share the reaction, but it's always from this intellectual space. And now I'm curious of if I set that boundary of just the noticing of the process, how will that shift that relational work in that moment?
Yeah. I mean, I find it's so helpful because it sets some limits on how far you go outside of that real-time experience, and there's natural emotional boundaries within it because when you take out your interpretation, it doesn't encourage the other person to interpret your interpretation. So you kind of keep some of that at a again, not policing it out, but limiting it just so we experience these different layers of connection, these different tones and textures of intimacy that are available to us, that we normally don't tap into. And and there's something about it too, where those emotional boundaries become really clear, because one person's just speaking from their primary experience, the other person's speaking from theirs. And as you start to do that and people become clear, then where connection is reveals itself. Because a lot of the time we're thinking about connection as connecting our minds together. And it's like, we connect because we have shared interests, or we talk about art or politics or sports, or reflecting on the past, anticipating the future, talking about present issues or things to celebrate in our lives. And none of those things are bad. They are ways to connect, but we are whole nervous systems that include a brain. But even the way we use our brains isn't even tapping into like the sort of physiological experience of the brain being part of the nervous system, because there's the content of the thoughts, and then there's like, oh, my brain feels kind of all crunched up just trying to take in all this information all at once or something like that, you know?
And we get so much information in every single day that it's like you can never stop thinking about what you're looking at or what you're being told or what podcast you're listening
Content,
to,
content,
which,
content.
everybody should listen to mine. But what does it mean to actually stop and just exist within your nervous system, within your brain?
Well, yeah, and this is the thing that I think kind of marks the sort of leading edge or the zeitgeist of where healing in the West is at the moment, is like, we had the sort of mindfulness revolution that happened over the last, probably like 40, 50 years, and really became big in the 90s and 2000s, especially as DBT and ACT became big. Um, and it's like, well, we're mindful now, but like we've been doing it individually. How do we take it into relationships? And it's like, people can know how to recognize a moment and say, oh, I feel really happy right now, or something like that. But do they know how to rest into it with the person they're with, and how to just hang out there, and to recognize when it's like how to track in real time, like, oh, I feel just like a sense of warmth and want to connect at just this level, and know when you feel full and you're ready to stop or shift, and track those little micro movements, of connection.
Like right now, I had had a little tightness in my chest as we were starting. Like, what is this going to look like? How is this going to go? It just disappeared.
It makes me so excited. I feel good. No, yeah, I was a bit nervous too, and but knowing that we had you took my class, we had some shared language, and so it's pretty easy to dive in with
And
you.
even more shared language than I had initially thought we would have.
Oh, yeah, no, it feels good. Feels good.
I am thinking of an example that I'd like to share and maybe get your reaction to this, just from my own life of what you're talking about. So, and I've talked about this on in a previous episode that I just moved. So it's been chaotic. It has triggered a lot from my past. There's been a lot of panic attacks and fear and abandonment getting triggered and like all these things. And one of the biggest changes is I've always had tons of roommates, whether it's family or friends or whoever. And in this place now, it is literally just me and my partner. And it is the first time in my life that I've had an experience of living with just one other person. And I work from home, I'm remote. It's very disconnecting. And then he is always at the office. And so the first 2 weeks that I was here, every time he did come back, all we talked about were logistics, right? Content, what needs to get moved, what still needs to get unpacked, what did you get done today? Hey, while I'm in the office, if you have energy, can you do these things? And after about a week and a half, I was like aggravated. I was like, this isn't okay. You missed this thing, like you did that. And I finally, like, we got into it. And I was like, I'm just
Oh,
lonely.
yeah.
Like, I am so lonely. And just everything just stopped. And we were like on opposite sides of the table. And he just walked over and hugged me. And we hugged for like 10 minutes. And like that moment was so pivotal of just, we slowed down together. And in that moment, like the logistics didn't matter anymore. And we haven't really talked about logistics since, unless we're actively in the mood for
No, and
it.
that's such a funny thing that you find, and it's like those places of conflict are again often like not about the conflict. They're about the misattunement or some just like I need some connectedness, some level that some sense that we're feeling each other and attuned to each other. Yeah, and it's like when you have those practices of attunement built in, you attend to the energy and the sense of disconnection first. And if there's still something to be talked about, it's much easier to talk about when you're no longer in a state of dysregulation, where you're both trying to take care of the feeling and make sense of what's going on cognitively. And often you find when you take care of that feeling space between you, what does it feel like between you and the other person and in the shared nervous system, all of a sudden there's not actually an issue.
Yeah. So, okay, you just said shared nervous system. Can you explain that a little bit more?
So I talk a ton about co-regulation. And co-regulation is always happening. I just talk about it in terms of the fact that our nervous systems are always impacting each other every single moment. If all of a sudden, I was to become much more loud and aggressive, your nervous system would have a reaction. If my nervous system collapsed in some way and I fell over, you would have a reaction. And you know,
Mhm.
if I talk at the speed my body actually wants to talk, and from the pace and place in my body that my body actually wants to talk, it has an impact on your nervous system. And really, you can't separate two humans' nervous systems when they're in the same room.
Mhm.
Like physiologically, they're not tied together. One person can leave the room, and all of a sudden there's you know they're not impacting each other in the same way. But we're so attuned to environment in that way, and especially attuned to other humans or any other creature in the space with us, that we're impacting each other even if we're not aware of it. I mean, you know it really well if you're like at work and you have a colleague you don't get along with, and you're in a meeting and you don't think they're supposed to be there, and then they come in and you're like, uh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Or,
Hmm.
you're sitting at home reading a book and your cat hops on your lap and starts purring. Your nervous system has a reaction to that. And it's just, the fact that these processes are always happening, but our language does not harness those things. It doesn't even teach us to track it. Like our social scripts are very much about fitting into particular roles in a given moment and deferring to how power is supposed to be navigated and negotiated and what manners and pleasantries and things and what's acceptable behavior and what's not. All those things could be unpacked a ton, but
Yeah.
underneath all that, there's this relational process that's absolutely essential for human well-being. And we've got these massive collective problems on top of all the relational and emotional problems that people are dealing with. And just knowing that, like you were saying, you can go spend weeks, people sometimes spend years in conflict not knowing that they can actually just orient to feeling good in their systems and finding where it's accessible with people in their lives. I find like I've done these practices in like deeper ways where you do deeper dives on for 45 minutes at a time, sometimes just a couple times at a workshop or gathering, sometimes in a retreat setting. But I find when I build it into my life with friends, like just doing 5 or 10 minutes of co-regulation practice at the beginning of hanging out, it's much easier to just naturally flow into conversation or going for a walk or cooking together or dancing or whatever.
So what does a co-regulation practice at the beginning of hanging out look like? Like if you and I were to do that practice together.
Usually just something like the noticing game or the relational meditation I was talking about
Mhm.
earlier.
Okay.
It's really just like, yeah, oh,
Okay.
in this moment I feel open, curious, spacious,
Yeah.
back and forth.
I'm feeling really grateful, also open and excited.
Ah, Yeah. There's a sense of happiness hearing that. There's some energy lifting in my system, feeling it go up my spine, through my shoulders and my arms.
I just noticed my shoulders drop. Like I'm settling in. I can feel it slowing down.
Mm, I like the slowing down. Yeah, sense of dropping in, sense of sense of some hopefulness.
I share that. I share
Ah,
that.
my heart feels happy and uplifted hearing that.
Hmm. Back to gratitude.
See, and even just we did that for like 45 seconds. And you see how much we like
And
just like are we're constantly touching each other. That sounds dirty. Um,
we're building trust and our nervous systems are connecting within that.
right, but like it's something that I talk about in terms of like, you'll hear people talk about how touch starved a lot of humans are these days. We're touch starved not just physically, but also emotionally. And you notice
Mm,
there, like we practiced a form of vulnerability, but it's a different form of vulnerability than we usually practice. It's just describing what it's like to be us right now, each of ourselves in this connection. And so it's vulnerable, but it's low stakes vulnerability because I'm not sharing vulnerable like information with you about who I am, my history, what's going on in my relationships, things that you could wield against me. And I'm not asking or pulling that from you. And it's not something that it's lower risk for like needing somebody to understand the interpretation and where you're coming from and all those things. So it's the way of titrating into connectedness with low stakes but still real authenticity. And that's something that I think, I think it's a layer of sort of like I talk about like emotional relational dexterity or fine motor movement because most of our
mhm.
emotional and relational tools are fairly underdeveloped. Just, we don't get any real cultural education around these things. And so most people get to be adults and they realize I need remedial emotional education because I never got any. My family didn't
Yeah.
teach me any. The schools don't teach us any, or if they do, it's just minimal and it isn't really applied. And so, it's like we've got to learn these basics. We're kind of ham-fisted and we got to figure out how to like actually turn knobs and turn dials and get nuanced.
Well, and being able to not just identify what's happening within your nervous system, but being able to cue into another's, right? Like when you slowed down, I noticed that I slowed down as well, right? And when I shared the gratitude, both of us, like we put our hands to our chest just automatically. Like I'm cued into this, but so many people are not taught that. And so if you say something, maybe you mistakenly said something in a way you didn't mean to, but you had good intentions, and then your partner tenses up and gets defensive, even if what they're saying isn't defensive, your body is picking up on that cue, and then you're going to get defensive, and it's going to lead to that kind of conflict, even if it's what neither of you wanted.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's a big thing is that, we don't recognize that we always seem to always have an agenda when emotions show up. And like what we did in just 45 seconds of going back and forth was like just being with our own experience and witnessing how connection arises within that. It's like, oh, actually just being with and enjoying my own natural sense of gratitude both feels good for me and feels good for the other person when they're oriented to just being with themselves. But so often with positive or negative feelings, like we have sort of trained into us cultural collective agendas. If it's a bad feeling, we need to fix it. If it's a good feeling, we need to hold on to it. And both those things create, make well-being feel precarious, and don't allow us
Mm.
just to tap into like just really holding ourselves and witnessing that if you hold yourself well, you're actually holding the shared connection in the other person well too.
Well, and I want to go a little bit deeper in that too, because through society and just what we are taught and not taught, if there is an uncomfortable emotion, fear, anger, sadness, grief, pain, we're not supposed to feel it. And so we're not supposed to show it. So if we're feeling it, there's something wrong. So then we need to protect ourselves from that feeling. So then we end up separating from each other even more.
Yeah.
And so then there's this belief, right, that we can only connect in the good emotions, the ones that we're allowed to feel, versus finding connection no matter what the experience is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like we've got to protect ourselves and each other from the negative emotions. When really it's just like, if it can just be like, oh, I'm noticing like some sadness coming up. And then you can just be like, oh, hearing that, I'm like, I just feel a sense of like care and like spaciousness, want to welcome that. You'll like when I find when I practice this, like sometimes, yeah, there is like deep processing that wants to happen, but a lot of the time it just wants just enough witnessing. And like, so I've dove in with friends before where it's like, you know, yeah, I feel like I might say like, oh, I'm feeling a sense of like openness and feeling good today. And they might be like, oh, yeah, like as I'm settling in, I'm noticing like some grief and some yearning. And then I'm like, oh yeah, hearing that there's just some like care and concern, welcoming. And then they're like, oh, hearing that, that feels really good. My heart feels better. And then we just move on. Sometimes it just needs the like just like that it can be exactly as it is. Like I really try to root in. So I talk about regenerative connection. Um and I take these ecological metaphors pretty far these days, because a lot of our ways of relating are built on extractive modes. Like we're often stuck in production, performance, consumption modes of being. That's kind of contemporary capitalism at the moment. And regardless of what your feelings are politically, that leaves out layers and modes of being that are essential to well-being. And really, I try to boil it down to naturalness, nourishment, and generativity. And really, that naturalness place is one that I sort of define as nothing needs to change, but nothing needs to stay the same.
Kind of like a flexibility for what is.
Yeah, welcoming things exactly as they are, including how they are going to change naturally. So it's like everything can stay the same, nothing needs to stay the same. And so when you can welcome your own experience and somebody else is doing that with you, like that is the thing that seems to be the most efficient way of welcoming whatever's showing up, positive, negative, mixed, neutral, everything in between.
Well, and it's so authentic. Just you get to be you in that experience and you get to be seen as you.
Huh. What more could you want?
That's all I need.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously there are so many different ways of being yourself and those things I mentioned before about performance, productivity, performance production and consumption, those are part of being human. Like we need to do those things. And there's authentic forms of that, but so often we're so caught up in that mode. Like we don't even realize how contrived our personalities can become. Like that's where a lot of the attachment stuff comes in, where we feel like we have to show up in relationships in particular ways or shape ourselves in particular ways to prove our worth.
So, where my mind went was I think you had posted it maybe last week or the week before, sometime between when we scheduled this and us talking around unconditional positive regard. And
Ah,
that spoke so deeply to me because it's something that I truly believe, but it's like you pulled the thoughts and the belief and put it into language that just was so succinct and beautiful.
yeah. Well, it's when you really unpack unconditionality, it has to be unconditional. So if it has the spin of like what positive is and what positive means, that can add some conditions to it. And that it has to be warm or look a particular way. But there's something like and this for me is influenced by a lot of like Buddhist, Taoist, non-dual sort of perspective and practice and what it's like to actually orient to what's unconditional. what's truly unconditional. And you know, I it's one of those places that almost feels like, gosh, it feels arrogant to even talk about it, or almost profane, because like, who am I to talk about what's unconditional? But it's also, who am I not to talk about it? Because it's, we're all human. We're all connected to that unconditional base reality. So I'm no better, but no worse to talk about it, I guess. So I'm gonna go for it. But I got sick March 2020, right when things were first starting, and I had a really mild case, and like I just had a heavy chest, a cough, and some fatigue, but never had a fever. My oxygen levels were fine. And I thought I got better, but then after that, I had progressively worsening chronic symptoms that at first I thought were burnout, but like it didn't get better with rest, and the cognitive symptoms got way worse and pretty gnarly and confusing, and physical symptoms and sensory issues and all these things. And I had several physical health crashes, including one that really felt like a near-death experience. And eventually, like pushing through and trying to make things work with a body that was failing. I eventually had a mental health episode from just pushing past my limits. And so that was its own sort of, I don't know, death and rebirth experience. And had both my parents die in the last couple of years. And this was all, my life path fell apart, and my parents died relatively young. My dad was 69, my mom was 65. She died like literally a few days after her first Social Security check came in. She was retiring.
Mm.
And there's a lot of tragedy in that, but there was something about like being sick in such a way that I couldn't run from any of it, that I couldn't fight with any of it. And I had to just, like, there was no choice but to love within my circumstances. And I've had some recovery, so I am feeling somewhat better and more capable. And I was lucky enough never to be like significantly bedbound or housebound in the way some people have ended up. But it's been a very tedious life where at times like I couldn't even really watch TV because it was too much sensory overwhelm, so there was nothing I could do.
I mean, it sounds terrifying and overwhelming. And, talking about you had a life plan, there were expectations, there were hopes, there were goals. And then your body and the universe just kind of went, no, that's not what you're doing right now. You're doing this instead.
Yeah, I joke with my friends that I got a postdoc in suffering. um, except I didn't finish the doc.
Oof.
So but you know what was interesting about that is that, even though there were many days where all I could do was pretty much stay in bed, and just take care of my most basic needs, it revealed how even the most tedious life that's mostly defined by illness for a period of time is really kind of a grand adventure. And there's I don't think I can put into words in a way like how it just becomes apparent that unconditional love is the foundation of all things. It is just what when you surrender to that which is unconditional, it just keeps revealing itself. And that I have a sense that there's no such thing as suffering in vain. And I could be completely wrong about these things, but it's like
But here's the thing, it's your experience, which means it's right. And it might not fit for somebody else, but it fits for you.
well, and that's part of it too, is when I say that I could be completely wrong about that, that's part of that. That's part of the embodiment of trusting in unconditionality. So part of my spiritual practice includes self-inquiry, which is just a simple practice. Like it comes from like a Buddhist and Eastern spirituality, and non-dual practices where you give yourself something to contemplate, and it can be a question like, what is unconditional? And you don't try to answer it, you just orient to that which is unconditional. and that sort of discovery and insight place, and you continually surrender to it, and you find not that you find an answer, but that that which is unconditional is always here, and you keep sort of your illusions about the world continually crumble and crumble and crumble. You get stuck on some of them, and then you're humbled by it. Then they crumble more and more, and you just keep surrendering, and all that you keep finding is more. Well, love is the closest word.
And that right there is the ultimate process, right? Because you could get stuck on it, but getting stuck on it is the logical.
And getting stuck on it is part of it too. That's part of the experience,
Yeah.
and getting stuck on it is part of serving self and other, and getting the world unstuck, and being a part of the whole human game. Like there's, you know, we should obviously do our best to root out ignorance in ourselves when we find it. And there's also the humbling recognition that ignorance is part of the human condition. We can never know everything. We're always going to be humbled that our pictures of the world are incomplete, our beliefs about the world are incomplete. Um, and being able to hold that is kind of one of the most ultimately humbling things, and makes it easier to orient to the project of serving the world, I think, at least.
Well, and just the beautiful idea that there's always more to discover. Like
Always.
if you're open, if you're curious, anytime you discover something or find an answer, it just opens up more doors.
Turns out every moment is a discovery. I mean, it's just true. It's like you've never been in this moment before, you'll never be in it again.
Yeah.
It's always something to discover.
I am thinking about the hypothetical that people ask on and off of like, well, if you could go back and relive your life with the knowledge you have now, would you do it the same? It's like, well, if I have the knowledge I have now, I'd probably do some things different. But the whole point is that I didn't
Yeah.
know, which means it's exactly what I needed to go through. It's exactly what I needed to discover to know what I know now. And I'm excited to get to know something new next.
Yeah, yeah. In my personal sort of way of reckoning with the notion of free will, it's like, I think we have free will, but not in the sense that there's a separate self that can puppet master this life, but instead that we are completely organic. And the way these things play out is this shape-shifting, evolving, elaborate dance that has a level of mystery that can never be comprehended by language and the mind. Not to say that the language and mind are bad, but that is what makes it unceasingly um, beautiful in a way that like makes it clear that the word beautiful, it doesn't come close to touching it. Like even that is too
Yeah.
not enough.
If you slow down in it, it is. Life is so
Huh?
beautiful. It's chaotic and messy and suffering filled, but it's so beautiful.
Yeah. 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 Oh, it's good to see you, Anastasia.
It's good to see you and just this energy that we have together. I don't, this is podcast is all audible or audio, but you were doing this like fluid motion with your hands while you were describing that. And it's just that dance, right? That back and forth, almost like that infinity symbol of it's just this push and pull and like connection and vulnerability. And it's just this back and forth that is just constant.
Ah, yeah. It's a vivid life.
I am so glad that you're a part of it.
Oh, I feel touched. That feels really nice to receive.
So I'm curious if there were any stories or any parts of your journey or language that you have built that we didn't get to talk about today
Uh,
that is left lingering in your mind.
mm, oh, it's interesting because I've watched a lot of language disappear. Um,
Mm.
it's become less important to have like sort of it's like my frameworks have simplified and simplified and simplified to where it's just how do I most effectively and efficiently meet somebody in their inherent wholeness that has no disagreement with anything that could feel unwhole, like that's unwobbly, I guess. and so much of that is a place of unknowing. And that comes back to some of the unconditional things. But so much of how I like orient to, I've had to rebuild a life from scratch, and I'm supporting people who are orienting and building their lives at various levels, and often from a place of, lacking connection, loneliness, confusion in relationships, and things like that. And really, there's so much room for treating that as a process of discovery and curiosity. And most of that is just being willing to be unknowing. And so much of our anxiety comes from trying to fill in places of unknowing. So much of our neuroticism and going to negative places is where there's uncertainty, and we fill in the blanks. And again, that's not necessarily bad, but being willing to be unknowing is where life will reveal your power to you, or it's where it will reveal connectedness to you. I just got back into dating after some time off, and it's been really nice. I'm living in Portland now. I'm in the city, so it's the first time I've lived in the city as an adult, and it's
Mm,
been going well. But it's
nice.
been nice to be in this place and have a level of emotional maturity. And it's like when I try to make connection happen or go and collect a partner or something, like the energy just feels bad. But when
Mm,
I just go places with a sense of openness and see where connection reveals itself in all the different ways and all the various ways, then where the natural confidence comes out, where my natural self comes out most easily, that reveals itself, and that reveals itself as a potential connection. And there's a layer of just trusting how connection and how one's life path reveals itself. And that's mostly about not knowing. That's mostly about like letting go of so many of our assumptions about the world. And that's what I try to do with like the relational frameworks and language. It's like, how do we get out of these scripts and not necessarily police them out, not necessarily say they're bad, but what happens when we let go of them for a minute and see what arises between people naturally.
and being able to trust that reaction that you have and not get too caught up in the thoughts of how you should be feeling.
Exactly, exactly. Oh, I can't count how
Mm.
many times I've heard people say, I'm not sure what I should be feeling right now. And I'm like, if you don't feel anything, just let yourself not feel anything.
It's okay to not. It's also okay to feel what you are feeling, even if your brain is telling you you're not supposed to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the cool thing about the like social meditation, where so much of the time people will get to places where it's like, oh, I don't quite have words for this, and I don't think I'm going to find any. And I'm like, oh, that's great. That's the place of learning. That's the place of
Yeah.
recognizing that our language doesn't can't match everything. And that's the place of emergent language, where you get to be creative, where you get to see what comes through. Um,
I say one of my favorite reactions to that, I usually say something along the lines of, well, then maybe don't try to describe it. Can we just sit with it for a second? Just,
yes.
just like have that
Yeah.
experience. I don't need to be a part of it logically. Can I just sit with you while you have that experience?
Yeah. Yeah. Let go of agenda, let go of trying to label it, and let it see what it does. Well, and that's,
Hmm.
that this is where I see the interaction between personal, relational, and collective change is like, I have my particular views and beliefs about what the problems of the world are and what would be helpful in fixing them and those types of things. And those are helpful conversations at times. But there's also been a real recognition here that, you know, no human being is any more or less organic than any other. And everything we
Hmm.
produce, even the things that could be called inorganic, are the result of organic processes just unfolding. And so, if the iteration of the world we're going through has problems, we've arrived here organically. What plants the seeds for what comes next organically to be healthy? Because when I go from
Hmm.
the mindset of control then I try to push and pull on myself to be different. I try to push and pull on my partner to be different. I try to push and pull on the world to be different and manipulate it. But instead, if I look for like, where's the fertile ground? Where's the soil that I actually have access to that I can actually till, that I know how to till, that I know how to aerate and turn healthy and start to see what can grow here.
Mhm.
What do I actually have access to? Because it's really hard for people in the present moment to perceive what their power is personally, interpersonally, and collectively. And if you want to figure that out, you've kind of you've got to humble yourself enough to not know and just start to witness how it reveals itself over time and see where you can build mutual nourishment with other people. Because I spent so much time. I mean, you knew me when I was in grad school. I was following the traditional academic route, and I was also pursuing more traditional Buddhist practice and some of the new school authentic relating practices that emerged in the 20th century that have been big in various places like Boulder and Austin and Berkeley, and are starting to gain some traction, and also participating in social justice and healing justice stuff. And all of those things were very valuable, and they all had various flaws, and most of them had the same flaws of similar types of relational issues bubbling up over and over, and similar types of emotional problems bubbling up over and over and over, and causing the same types of disruptions. And so it's like there's the foundations, there's the work of soil regeneration that I know I can attend to, and that we can do in our personal lives, like even if we feel disempowered at higher levels, or that we only have minimal power in terms of like being able to vote and organize on particular things, and knowing that there's opposition to those things. It's like where do we gain the traction of building those sorts of there's a quote about islands of coherence, when there's a system is in chaos. That's from a Nobel Prize winning chemist, I think. It's out there. You can look it up if you like.
Yeah.
But in this sort of contemporary messy world, it's like, actually finding that real coherence, and that coherence needs to be much more embodied than just thought based. Because if you just go based on being able to say the right things to each other or agree on the thought level, you're missing out on being able to um, train into the levels of trust that can handle the deeper work. And because if you don't do that, then
Yeah.
you run into those ruptures,
Oh,
and you're not prepared to deal with them.
I just am soaking in everything that you just said. And this work that you are doing, that you have found passion in, even though it wasn't your original path. Like I'm almost like I'm picturing you as one of those islands, but for that emotional work, because it's not something that's taught and it isn't something that everybody can identify. But every time you slow down with someone and just notice and process and react and feel, you're modeling to them what it means to slow down, what it means to notice, what it means to feel. And then they're going to spread that. And so within you co-regulating with your friends, your family, your clients, that co-regulation is almost bringing them back down. It's like if I'm anxious or in a thought spiral or having a panic attack and I look at Juliet and she's upside down on her back, legs in the air, snoring. I'm like, okay, this is all just thought in my head. I am safe. I am comfortable. I am happy. Like this thought has nothing to do with my present moment. Because if something was happening that I needed to be panicked about, Juliet would not be snoring happily right next to me.
No, and that's exactly it. Those having many points of contact to that help you orient to what's actually happening right now. Because that point of contact will react with you in the way of urgency if you need urgency, and not if not.
Mhm.
And especially if you build those connections in a healthy way, where you are attuned to the moments correctly, the more those more healthy points of contact, the more healthy a person's going to be. And that's why, I feel like this is just part of the work that just needs to be built out because we have a lot of individualized models and those are important, but it's like how do we help people to build integrated lives? And how do I, and for me,
Mhm.
it's like it's just this very patient dream to support people in tilling their soil and having those points of contact. And I like to support people in whether I start with them one on one or in a relationship, start just doing it on this micro level, and then you can build towards having like doing like a retreat or a trip with your loved ones, your chosen family, your friends, where you have these emotional, relational, meditative skills built in, and you can build exactly the type of experience you want. So instead of going on a retreat and having profound experiences, but with mostly with relative strangers or people who aren't integrated into your life, you have the skills to do it safely and easily with the people that are built into your life that'll be with you through thick and thin. And even if they're people that grow apart from you, they're more likely to be people that are integrated into your city. So, like, you help each other to filter towards and away from the people that most serve you.
That is beautiful. You're like a beautifully grounded garden. Like I just feel like your energy just like spreading out to the world, just like I got you. And you're not alone. And it's so
Oh, thank you,
powerful.
thank you. So I'm still in this place where my livelihood is still precarious. I've been recovering, and I have slowly been building a practice and just getting situated here. But I think it's going to work. I've got enough money to last me a little while.
I'm excited to see what you do with
Yeah. Well,
this.
I mean, I just want like a healthy relational field because so often like people when we see people engage in manipulative patterns or just there's the unhealthy ruptures where people are clawing at each other or like clawing at themselves. It's just like you just need healthy contact and you need to be able to access that. And what happens if these skills and ways of connecting were just everyday things and it just became easier to feel and perceive each other and see where we can actually grow towards each other and make it healthy to oh, that's actually another concept that I would bring in that I didn't talk about in this ecological framework. One thing we're really, really scared of in connection is decay. And all relationships go through cycles of growth and decay. Even when they're growing healthier and better, there's ups and downs. And they're
Mhm.
supposed to have that. And we're supposed to have ebbs and flows of closeness versus lack of closeness. And sometimes a friend is just a friend to us for a season in our life or for a few months.
Mhm.
Um, and that's okay. But we often treat our relationships like they're contracts and job interviews and things. And they come with terms and conditions, some named and some unnamed. And sometimes you don't even realize what they are until you're a couple years into a relationship and something your partner does starts to bother you. And those types of agreements aren't bad, but there's just a different ways of orienting that can allow those things and allow all these textures and gradations of intimacy to be able to show up in our lives so we can all be more nourished and well fed and for me to be a good steward in my own life and to help people in their own, it's how do I help you to welcome those things and to be okay with it and to actually be a good steward of growth requires being a good steward of decay.
One openness and unconditionality, right? Because just tying it all back together, it's okay to have needs. It's okay to have wants. It's okay to want a partner who's going to share the mental load that keeps a household running. Like all of that is necessary to a point. The difference is, hey, I need this thing. Do you expect them to be able to give it to you in exactly the way you want at exactly the time you want? Or can you accept that maybe this is a friend for a season and maybe they can't give you that forever? And that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with them and there's nothing wrong with you that that happened.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's like there's a phrase that I heard I was at APA when it was in Denver That was like, I think that might have been 2016 actually.
I think I presented at that conference.
And there was somebody presenting on Buddhism, I think, and he mentioned a phrase, a wise phrase he had heard from a teacher that was, "Do not take that which is not offered." And that's something
Mm.
I try to approach in relationships is like, and I can ask people for things, but I never want to ask them to be more than they are. I want to be able to trust that what they have to offer is enough while supporting each other and growing and supporting each other and building a functional household and all those things, of course. But like let what they have be enough, and that each person within the relationship can take responsibility for finding the types of connections to fill out their life. So you're getting you have a diet that's made up of a lot of different forms of connection, different types of connection, and different just more refined palate, I guess.
Well, and being able to be authentic in it in that process, right? It's like you're showing up as you, but in this interaction, that makes me feel sad, or that makes me feel disconnected, or that makes me feel smaller versus when we're connecting through it and maybe we are meeting each other's needs, then you're going to have more openness, more excitement, more curiosity in furthering that relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. So my dog is like scratching at the door, so I know it's like about that time for a walk. She's letting me know. But do you want to take a second to maybe plug what your practice is, give your Instagram
Yeah.
handles, your YouTube channel, all that good
Yeah.
stuff?
So my practice, you can find it at inventivewellness.com. inventivewellness.com. You can email me at inventivewellness@gmail.com. It's Inventive Wellness on YouTube, Inventive Wellness on Instagram, and Facebook. I haven't been updating much on Facebook. I spend a lot of time on Twitter because I have a lot of friends there. I feel ambivalent about Twitter at the moment, given its leadership. But
Yeah.
yeah, you can find me at those places. I have a lot of availability right now for virtual coaching for anybody that's interested. You can be situated anywhere in the world that I can see virtually. And I work individually or with relationships, whether it's personal, professional, everything in between. And what you can really expect is just support for emotional, relational well-being, orienting to feeling like your natural self and getting curious about how you can take that into relationship and find those places of mutuality that feed you and the other person simultaneously, make everybody's lives better. Because I want a world where everybody's lives are better.
I feel that you and I are aligned
Rock and
in
roll.
this. And even though you and I haven't really been in the same room in, oh my God, like 10 years,
10.
I know, but I can plug that you are such a kind and open presence. Even before you found all this work and this path, I have always felt accepted by you. And just whatever my experience was, you were down to sit in it with me. And so the fact that you followed that energy and that path and you're really working on this emotional relational work, I do think that anybody who sees you is going to have profound and potentially difficult experiences, but deeply important ones. Learning how to sit within your own experience is so hard, but so, so powerful
Yeah, the thing is, you're already doing it, so all the
all the
time, all
time.
the time. Yeah, that's the funny thing. You go far enough on a meditation path, you start to recognize there's actually no difference between meditation and non-meditation. Um,
It's just
yeah,
all the
yeah,
same.
it's a vivid
Yeah.
adventure either way.
I'm in the phase of my journey of what are all the boxes that I've put away in my brain that I never let myself feel. We're gonna open that box and we're gonna feel it until it's felt as much as it needed to feel. And it has been a lot of crying.
Oh no, that's relatable. That's relatable. Remind me, how old are you?
Yeah. Oh, 30.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. You're just like at the end of Saturn return. I dabble in astrology. Yeah, my Saturn return utterly decimated me. So
Honestly, I'm loving the journey. It's exactly what it needs to be.
Damn right.
How did you react to that? Did you connect with us? Did you realize that you've spent most of your life thinking and intellectualizing and may never actually let yourself truly, authentically feel? After meeting with Will, I noticed how easy it is to explain why I'm feeling something instead of just naming the feeling and letting it sit there, open and seen. It is so much easier to intellectualize and a lot safer to share those thoughts with someone than to be vulnerable and hope that they can hold space for our experience. No wonder we are lonelier than we have ever been. I want to change that. And hopefully you do too. And hopefully something we talked about today resonated with you. If it did, let yourself sit with that idea for a little while longer. If you have any questions for this podcast or any themes you'd like us to focus on in the future, send us a message on Instagram at insightswithuspodcast or send us an email at insightswithus@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please follow, like, or subscribe. If you want to support the continuation of this podcast, you can donate. To do so, find me, Anastasia Soroka, on buymeacoffee.com. Or if you want a chance to sponsor an episode, find Insights with Us on Patreon. I hope to build exclusive content eventually, but bear with me. My business and world are expanding this year in every direction. Either way, I appreciate you, and I appreciate that you are listening. Thank you for creating insight with us.